Welcome to Strategy Asia. My name is Eric Rosenkranz, and I will be your host for this series of programs brought to you by Metaliq Media. In our programs, we will be interviewing a series of people to understand what makes a successful strategy. But in this first program, I'm going to give a modified version of a lecture that I give at MBA programs throughout Asia. And we're going to ask this question to start with. Why do companies fail? Robert Kaplan of the Harvard Business School did some research a few years ago to understand why companies failed, and he learned the following things. 95% of the typical workforce do not understand their company's strategy. 85% of executive teams spend less than 1 hour every month discussing strategy. 70% of organizations do not link middle management incentives to strategy. 60% of organizations do not link the strategy to their budgeting process. And because of this, 90% of organizations fail to execute their strategy. Many business books get published every week. I personally don't like to read them. But somebody recommended a book a few years ago called Blue Ocean Strategy, which is one of the few business books I've actually finished reading. It's an excellent book, and one of the points it makes is what consistently separates winners from losers is their approach to strategy. So this kind of begs the question, what is a strategy? Let me tell you what a strategy is not. A strategy is not a vision statement. All companies have a vision statement. Vision statements are good things to have. 80% of the Fortune 500 companies have these 4 phrases in their vision statement. Integrity, customer satisfaction, employee loyalty, and shareholder returns. I took these 4 phrases from the vision statement of a company called Enron, which went bankrupt about 10 years ago and lost billions of dollars. Their vision statement was not a good strategy. Another thing a strategy is not is next year's operating plan. All companies need to have an annual operating plan. It usually says something like sales will go up 12% next year, costs will go down 15%. You have to do this. You have to have a next year operating plan. But that's not your strategy. If you don't have a strategy, how can you decide what you want to do next year? Let me give you a simple analogy. You wake up one morning, you get into the car, you drive to the first traffic light. Now, are you going to turn left, turn right, or go straight? You can't answer that question until you know where you're going. Are you going to your office? Are you going to a school? Are you going to your club to work out? You cannot make a short-term decision until you have first made a long-term decision. That's where the strategy comes into play. The most important thing about a strategy is deciding who is your target audience. Who is your customer? Then you can decide what product or service you're going to develop. This is a critical point because most companies do this wrong. Most companies do this the opposite way. They start with a product or a service, and then they say, who can I sell it to? This is the wrong way to develop a successful company. You have to first understand who your customer is, what his or her problems are, what their needs are, and then develop the product or service that will solve their problem. Once you've decided who your customer is and what you can sell, you can then decide where are you going to do this and when this will all happen. And these 4 things are the key components to developing a strategy. I want to emphasize this point. The shift from a product focus to a customer focus is the most critical one that every company must make. If you decide not to watch the rest of this podcast, I hope you do, but if you decide not to watch the rest of this podcast, this is the critical thing that you should remember. Ted Levitt, in the Harvard Business Review in 1960, wrote, "The organization must learn to think of itself not as producing goods or services, but as buying customers, doing the things that will make people want to do business with it." Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison at one point held the most number of patents for one man. It was well over 1,000 patents. Today, I think the record is held by some Japanese man who's invented a lot of transistors or something. But Thomas Edison, about 100 years ago, invented the light bulb, invented the motion picture camera. He invented many things that we still use today. And what he said was, I find out what the world needs, then I go ahead and invent it. The greatest inventor of all time first thought about what his customer needs were, then he started to create products. So I want to do a little bit of a mini case history here. I want to talk about one company that over 100 years modified its strategy based on an evolving target audience. Let's take a look at a company who over 100 years continually evolved its strategy by always modifying who its customer base was. The company is Gillette, which was founded in 1904 and produced one product, a razor blade. Gillette defined itself as the razor blade company. Note that it was describing itself as a product, the razor blade company. And over the next 100 years, until the 1950s, well, next 50 years, until the 1950s, sold one product, a razor blade. Now, sometime in the 1950s, its sales plateaued. It could not sell any more razor blades, and it had to rethink its strategy. And what they decided to do was change from being a product-focused company to a customer or consumer-focused company. And they said, who is our customer? And they said, our customer is the male shaver. What other products can we sell the male shaver? We can sell him shaving cream. And Gillette in the early 1960s launched shaving cream. Now let's think about this for a second. For 50 years, the Gillette company could not sell shaving cream because it defined itself as the razor blade company. Once it shifted its mentality from a product focus to a customer focus and defined its customer base as the male shaver, it could then start selling shaving cream. What else does the male shaver want? He wants shampoo. He wants underarm deodorant. And so the Gillette company could start selling different products, all on the strategy of going against the male shaver. Now, sometime in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and what I'm about to describe to you, I'm not sure actually happened. I just like to think it happened. I like to think Gillette spent millions of dollars in a marketing research survey that covered the entire globe, and they came up with this astonishing statistic. And if you're sitting at home, you might want to write this one down. They concluded that 50% of the people in the world are women. And they changed the definition of their target audience. And they brought in women. And what did this mean? This meant they could start selling female products, razors for women, shampoo for women. Now, at this point, and we're now talking sometime in the 1980s, they made another shift in their strategy, and they redefined who their target audience was. And they said, what are we very good at as a company? We know how to sell low margin, high frequency goods that are sold in supermarkets. So products sold in supermarkets that had a high turnover and very low margin, bought by housewives. And then they said, what other products could we sell that fit that definition? So they bought the Oral-B company and started selling toothbrushes. They bought the Papermate company and started selling disposable pens. And they bought the Duracell company and started selling batteries. Now, none of these products have anything to do with shaving or grooming, but they fit the new definition of the target audience of the housewife who goes to the supermarket and wants to buy high-frequency, low-margin products. Now, at this point, they sold themselves to the Procter & Gamble company for billions and billions of dollars. But we look at this over 100 years, how a company evolved its strategy and changed the products it sold by always changing who its definition of a target audience was. This next chart is quite important. It's something I developed myself. And what it does is helps a company analyze and determine who their potential target audiences can be. So if you look at this circle, starting from the center, we have current loyal customers. So these are people who buy your product all the time. They don't buy any other product. Think Apple computers, for example. There are people who are loyal to Apple. Now, the problem is when you have a loyal customer, they buy your product, how do you sell them another product? So you need to build up your product mix to sell different products to the same target audience. This is what Apple does by coming up with an iPad, an iPod, and the iWatch now. They're constantly evolving their product mix to talk to the same loyal customer base. Now, the next group in this circle are current switchers. Sometimes they buy your product, sometimes they buy the competitor's product. Your goal then, they know your product, they like your product, but sometimes they're switching. So your goal is to figure out how to get them to buy your product more often. Then you have rejectors. These people have tried your product, they didn't like it for whatever reason, and they're no longer using it. How do you get them back? We have never tried. People who have never tried your product, how do you get them to try it for the first time? And lastly, people who are not even in the category. They've never tried any product in this category. How do you bring them into the category? These are the 5 potential targets every company has. And it's up to you, when you're developing your strategy, to analyze each of these groups and decide which one you want to go after. Let's look at another company, Starbucks, that has developed marketing programs to go after each one of these 5 target audiences. Let's start with current loyal customers. You love Starbucks, you go into Starbucks every morning and you get a cup of coffee. Now there's a limit to how much coffee Starbucks can sell one person. So the question is, you're a loyal customer of Starbucks, you're coming in every day for a coffee. How do they sell more products to you? Well, the answer today is obvious. They sell food items, sandwiches, snacks, cookies. This was a major decision taken by Starbucks a number of years ago because the founder of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, did not want to allow food items in the Starbucks. He wanted every customer, when they walked into a Starbucks, to only smell coffee. And the smell of food interfered with that. So he resisted for many years the introduction of food. Today it's obvious. You walk into a Starbucks and of course you're going to get a sandwich or a cookie to go along with your coffee. But this was a major strategic decision, and it was taken so that Starbucks could sell more products to their loyal users. Let's talk about switchers. You're walking down the street, you want a cup of coffee. You love Starbucks, but you know that the nearest Starbucks is 10 minutes away. And there's a competitor to Starbucks maybe right in front of you. Which one are you going to go to? Are you going to go to the one right in front of you or the one 10 minutes away? Most people will go to the one right in front of them. They're switchers. They're loyal to Starbucks, they love Starbucks, but they will accept the convenience of another shop. So what's the strategy? Starbucks needs to build more outlets. This is why you go to a mall today, there might be 4 or 5 Starbucks in the same mall. Or in places like New York City, you can walk down the street and every 50 meters is another Starbucks. This is a deliberate strategy to go after the switcher so that whenever somebody wants a cup of coffee, there's always a Starbucks right in front of them. Rejectors. You tried Starbucks. You don't like it. Now, when Starbucks roasts its coffee, it actually over roasts the beans. It burns the beans. And it does this to create a very distinctive taste. When Starbucks was first introduced, this was the only type of coffee they served. Many people didn't like this strong flavor, and so they rejected Starbucks and went elsewhere. And eventually Starbucks realized they had to offer a variety of coffees. So now you walk into a Starbucks, and in addition to their signature coffee, you might see a sign that says, "Try our lighter Guatemalan mix." And they offer a variety of different taste profiles. This was their strategy to go after the rejecter. Never tried. Some people have just never walked into a Starbucks. Maybe they think it's too expensive. So Starbucks might run promotional coupons. They might run buy one, get one free. They do things to attract the person who's never tried. Lastly, people not in the category. There are just people who don't like coffee. Now, for years, Starbucks only served coffee. It was in their logo. If you look at the logo on the screen, you'll see it says Starbucks Coffee. That was the name of the company. And they refused to sell anything else. But there are just many people who don't want to drink coffee. Now you go into a Starbucks, you can get iced tea, you can get chai lattes, you can get non-coffee frappuccinos. They have a variety of non-coffee items, and it's gotten to the point where a few years ago they changed their logo, and the new logo does not say coffee, it just says Starbucks. This was their strategy to go after the non-category user. So you see, this is a company. Now, this is a large company. They have a big budget. They could afford to go after all 5 of the targets. You, when you're developing your company, do not have to do the same. You can only choose 1 or 2 or 3 of these targets if you like. So this graph may be helpful to you, in which you write down who are your potential customers, what is their need or their problem, what are the products and services you're going to sell to them, and what are the markets in which you're going to sell. Now, the way to identify a customer need is by solving consumer problems. Most people cannot tell you what they need. They can tell you what their problems are. Let me give you a classic example of this from the 1950s. The General Motors car company in America was trying to sell more cars to women. They wanted to get more women drivers. They asked women what their problems were when driving, what women hated about driving. And women said, I hate shifting the car. It's really difficult for me to use the manual shifting. So the General Motors engineers invented the automatic transmission, so women would not have to shift. Now, you could not go to a woman and say, do you want an automatic transmission? They don't know what it is. They could not describe the need. What they could do was describe the problem, and it was up to the company to solve that problem by creating the automatic transmission. So, when you've identified your target audience, try to understand what their problems are. Another phrase we use is pain points. Try to understand what their pain points are, solve that pain point, and then you can create a very successful company. More modern time, we could talk about Google, for example. Google did not invent the first search engine. There were many other search engines out there before Google, but they didn't work. You would put in a question or a query or something you wanted to search, and you would get bad answers. People were extremely frustrated, had a lot of problems using search engines. So Google decided to fix those problems and created one of the biggest and most valuable companies in the world. They did it by solving consumer problems. You have to do the same. So, in summary, who is your target audience? What are their needs? How do you solve their problems? What benefits do you bring them? What are you used instead of? And why should people buy your products versus the competition? Here's a handy chart that you might use to organize your thinking. Who is your target audience? Why do they need your product? What is the need? What is the product or service you're going to sell? Where and how are you going to sell it? What are you used instead of? And what is your core idea? I'll do another case history now in which we're going to fill in these boxes. This scene, it's pretty obvious where it is. This is China. China has, you may have heard, a lot of people. The time period that this case history involves is about 2002, which is, you can see in this chart, is when the GDP growth of China started taking off. Here's a photograph, two photographs, a composite of Shanghai in 1990 and 2010, and you can see how quickly the country was developing over the space of 20 years. So you have to imagine a time of rapid growth. Many consumer products, and this is 2002, many consumer products were first being introduced in China, such as credit cards, banking, private real estate. Until now, all housing was government-owned. This was the first time that consumers could buy housing. Cell phones were first coming out. We needed telecom companies to service the cell phones, and people could buy cars for the first time. Until then, it was mostly bicycles. So there were many very expensive products that were being offered for the first time. So we could say, who was our target audience? For this particular case, the target audience was these luxury good advertisers, people who were producing these products. Now, who did they want to sell to? They wanted to sell to the high-income businessman. So, we really have what we call a B2B to C model, business to business to consumer. The company whose case we're looking at today was selling to the advertiser, and the advertiser was trying to reach the upper income Chinese businessman. They wanted to sell him cars, credit cards, telephones, real estate. Now, normally you might run television commercials to do this. But there was a problem in China, actually a number of problems. First, in the West, we might have 2 or 3 or even 4 television sets in a household. In China, at that point, there was only 1 television set per household, 1 television set. And the businessman was rarely at home to watch TV. He was out having business dinners. He was doing karaoke. He was having business meetings late at night. So he was rarely coming home to watch TV. And when he did, his wife controlled the remote control. So she decided which channels to watch. And she wanted to watch her programs, not the programs he wanted to watch. And she would get very upset. Why are you changing the channel? She would complain. So we have only 1 television set, the housewife deciding what to watch, the businessman rarely at home. So it ends up being he's not watching television. So that becomes the problem. The businessman is hard to reach with a TV commercial. So how do you solve this problem? The gentleman who founded this company that I'm going to talk about said to himself, if the businessman is not at home watching TV, how do I reach him with a television commercial? Where is he? Well, he's going to his office building. And he's waiting in the lift lobby, and he's waiting for a long time in the lift lobby. Because in China, buildings are built with half the number of elevators as in Western countries, and they put twice as many people on a floor. So with twice as many people and with half the number of elevators, you end up with huge waits for the lift. In fact, and I've timed it, the average amount of time to wait for a lift in China is 2.2 minutes. The average time to wait for a lift in a building in New York or London is 7 seconds. Now, remember again, this is 2002. If it were today and you go to the lift and you have to wait for 2 minutes, you take out your phone and you start playing Candy Crush or you start checking your emails. At the time, cell phones did not exist in China. People were bored waiting for the lift. They had nothing to do for 2.2 minutes. So what this company did was put a television screen in the lift lobby of office buildings right above the call button. So the businessman, when he was waiting for 2 minutes, had nothing else to do but to look at that TV screen where they could run 4 30-second television commercials. Now remember, this is our core target audience. This is the upper income businessman who has nothing to do for 2 minutes but to watch the commercials we run. So the what becomes obvious. The what, the product and service we're selling, are TV screens in office lift lobbies. Now you see the theme that I've been talking about this entire podcast. You don't start with a product. You start with a customer. You figure out what his problem is. Then you solve the problem. When we went to find investors for this company, they said, oh, this is so obvious. This is so easy. You're just putting TV screens in lift lobbies. And we said, yes, but nobody else has thought of it before. And we had a massive success. The company was called Focus Media. Jason Jiang, who was the founder and chairman of the company, was 31 years old in 2002 when he started this company. The Ware became tier 1 cities in China. We were used instead of the major television networks. And the core idea was we enable advertisers to reach the hard-to-reach Chinese businessman with a TV commercial by putting digital screens in the lift lobbies of office buildings. A very simple idea. I became the vice chairman of this company. We IPO'd on NASDAQ in 2005, got a valuation day one of $680 million. And a year later, we were at $7.5 billion of valuation. An extremely successful company created solely based on a customer problem. Let's summarize what we've learned today. What are the lessons for success? Or in other words, how do you write a successful strategy? First, identify your target consumer. Next, solve their problem. Then, get into the market as quickly as possible and make mistakes. I cannot emphasize this point enough. Too many people spend too much time in the laboratory trying to perfect their product. I don't recommend it. Get your product 80-90% complete. Get it into the market because you're going to learn more when consumers start interacting with your product, and you'll want to redevelop it at that point. So get into the market as quickly as possible. Make mistakes. When you think you have a successful business model, that's when you want to raise funding and ramp up as quickly as possible. That concludes our program for today. Thank you very much for watching. In our next episode, we'll be interviewing some successful businessmen on what makes a successful business strategy. My name is Eric Rosenkranz. I've been your host for Strategy Asia, brought to you by Metaliq Media.